Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Joanne Meredith, and I am a lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton, which none of you will ever have heard of, but it is a university near Birmingham in the UK. And I'm going to start this talk slightly unconventionally by telling you that I am not a software developer. In fact, the amount that I know about coding would literally fit on one line of piece of paper, and even that I'm not sure is correct. I am a psychologist. And in particular, I am a cyber psychologist. So cyber psychology is basically a branch of psychology that is interested in everything to do with the internet and the online world. And at the University of Wolverhampton, we have a cyber psychology research unit, where we do research into all sorts of stuff to do with the online world. I am also a social psychologist. So what this means is that I am interested in the way in which other people impact upon our behaviour, the social aspects of our online behaviour. I'm not interested in how we process information. That's what cognitive psychologists do. I'm not interested in how our identity as an introvert or an extrovert might impact our online behaviour. I'm interested in social aspects. My particular area of expertise is in online communication. And I'm interested not only in the social aspects of online communication, but also the technological aspects of online communication. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is, firstly, what do we know in psychology about online communication? How do we know it? And I'm also going to suggest some ways in which I think software developers could be really helpful for psychologists. So let's start with a basic question. Why are we interested in online communication? The basic thing is, other than the fact that psychologists are inherently nosy people, is that there is a lot of online communication. This is data from the UK, from the Ofcom survey, which suggests that 49% of all adults in the UK said they'd used instant messaging in the last week, and 74% of adults in the UK said they'd used email. This is quite a large proportion. When we then look at it divided by age, it becomes even more interesting. In that, for emails, it's relatively even across the age groups. You get a little bit of a dip post 65, but it's relatively even. When we then look at instant messaging, though, there's quite a significant drop-off post 55. And this is kind of interesting, because what it suggests is that people who have grown up with the internet, what we call digital natives, although that is quite a contested term, are using the internet more and more for their communication. And for us as psychologists, one of the things that's particularly interesting is what impact is that going to have on us as a society as more and more people communicate predominantly through instant messaging? And you can think about all the different ways in which you use online communication. I'm sure many of you use things like Slack for work. Academics, we don't tend to use instant messaging, but we do like email. So we tend to use email all the time. You can also communicate with various companies now via the internet. You can send complaints to Twitter. This is British Telecom, one of our telephone broadband providers in the UK. And you can go online and you can have a chat with them where they explain to you that no, your internet is not going to be working for like another 6 weeks, but at least you don't have to listen to their hold music while you do it. Another thing that's happening in the UK, and this is something that I'm currently working with Staffordshire Police, is that you can now report low-level crime via Facebook and Twitter. So you can go onto Staffordshire Police's Twitter or Facebook page, and you can report that your neighbour is having too many loud parties, or there's a broken window, or somebody's left a car abandoned. And their call handlers will deal with that all via Facebook and Twitter, although they have a very bad interface system for dealing with it, I have to say. Another thing that I'm particularly interested in is the impact of online communication on broader issues, like politics. This is something that we talk about an awful lot. And what I'm interested in is how it is that the fact that so much communication about politics now happens online, and the impact that the technology can have on that, and the fact that you can put things out there online without potentially being questioned, without necessarily being challenged, without necessarily having to defend yourself, has on the understandings of political situations. So this is an example from one of our right-wing newspapers in the UK. It's about Brexit, because that's all we talk about in the UK at the moment. And it's interesting to see how people actually debate and talk about politics in a setting where they're anonymous. But then there's also more mundane, kind of personal aspects of communication. Online dating is now such a big thing. The most recent data I've seen, although this is a bit old now, suggests that 1 in 5 relationships now start online. And understanding how that communication works, what doesn't work, is really important for exploring how relationships start. And then there's the thing that really interests me, which is the role that the technology can play on those interactions. So, what happens when there's an autocorrect fail? What do people do? Yeah, you've all just got it. What do people do? How do they deal with it? How do they manage the fact that something has just happened like that and that the technology has done that? And that's also interesting, how us as humans deal with technological issues. Now, in psychology, there is at the moment kind of different branches in terms of the way in which we approach online interaction. And there is a concern that online communication is not good for us, that it is in some way damaging to us because the communication that we can have online is less than a conversation. You cannot be as empathetic online. You cannot be as intimate online. And that the more we communicate online, the more damaging it will be to our ability to have face-to-face conversations, which is where empathy and intimacy lie. And this is a view expounded by Sherry Turkle, who's a big name in cyber psychology. Now, why is it that we as psychologists think that? Well, we have various theories. The first one is a branch of theories known as cues filtered out theories. So these all argue that when you are online and communicating in text-based medium, you do not have access to non-verbal cues. You do not have access to people's facial expressions, to their gestures, to nods, to feedback, to smile, to what we call paralinguistic cues. So that is somebody's tone of voice. You can think about times when it can be quite difficult to understand irony or sarcasm online. So these theories all suggest that when we are online, the interaction is less rich because we don't have all of those cues. And one of the concerns with that is that it leads to abusive or belligerent behavior. So things like trolling, even things like conspiracy theories, are potentially put down to an idea of online disinhibition. So this is the notion that because of a number of features, which are put down by John Suler, who came up with this theory, we are less likely to be inhibited online. So things like anonymity, for example, the fact that you can be anonymous online means you can say something that's abusive or aggressive or simply wrong, and nobody can come back to you and say, hang on a second, you said this thing. You're anonymous. The fact that the interaction is most commonly asynchronous is also quite important because you don't get immediate feedback. In a face-to-face communication, you can be interrupted if you're just about to say something that's really offensive or abusive. Online, you can just put it out there and disappear and not have to worry about it. And so this is an argument for why there is abusive behaviour and abusive communication online. It is worth noting that this disinhibition can actually be quite good in times. It can actually be fairly benign. For a simple reason that if you are less inhibited, you're potentially going to be more likely to be able to build stronger relationships. This is known as the hyper-personal effect. You are actually going to get closer to people online because you are less inhibited than you might do in a face-to-face communication. And this is why things like online support groups work, because people are willing to go online and talk about their problems in an anonymous setting where they don't feel that kind of pressure. So those are the cues filtered out theories. There's another branch of theories called interpersonal theories. Now these start to take account of human factors, of us as individuals, and the way in which us and the context impact upon the interaction. So one of the things, think about something like Slack, and you use that at work. And you might think Slack is a really good tool for work, because it means that people don't come and interrupt you with a phone call or come and ask you a question. They can just put a message up on Slack, you can deal with it whenever you want to. But at the same time, if there's one workmate who continuously sends you messages via Slack, and who just doesn't shut up on Slack, then you're going to find Slack a really annoying tool, and you're not going to like it as something to help you with work. And that's not because of Slack itself and the features of it, it's because of that annoying workmate. And this is the same with a lot of different technologies. It depends on who you are talking to. Are you talking to a stranger? Are you talking to your friends? Is it a medium you're used to? If somebody suddenly gets you to try and use something that you're not used to, it can be quite a daunting thing, and you may not find it as useful as the thing that you've already been using. And the other thing that interpersonal theories point out is that actually, yes, we don't have access to these non-verbal cues. And that may be problematic, but actually we found ways to get around it. We're quite resourceful at using the features of the medium to deal with this. And this has evolved over time. So we've evolved from just using your basic emoticon smileys with the punctuation. And that was a basic way of saying, this should be funny, or you should read this as an amusing thing rather than me being angry. And then we got emojis, which allowed you to do a broader range of things. There seems to be emoji for everything now. And then as the technology has developed, we've got GIFs. And so you can now effectively find a way to show your body language, your facial expressions, your stance in general, your attitude in general to something, by using somebody else's body effectively and somebody else's face. Now, this isn't all just down to the users. This is down to what the medium itself allows. But as individual users, and as groups of users, we have found really good ways of managing the potential problems that the cues filtered out theory suggests that we have. Now, these two branches of theories kind of lend themselves to this continuum in psychology of how we approach technology. So cues filtered out is a bit more on this determinist side. This is the idea that the technology determines the interaction. If you build it, they will come, or they will speak in this way, okay? So this is the idea that actually particular features of technology make users do particular things. On the other side, well, not quite totally in the interpersonal theories, are constructionists. So constructionists argue that no feature of a technology has any meaning until it is used by users. This is slightly difficult to give an explanation of for technology. So let me do it using something really simple, like a table, okay? We kind of know what a table looks like. It's probably got 4 legs and a top. That's a table. Or is it a desk? Or is it a chair? Or that table actually only has 2 legs, so is that still a table? Or is this a table? Or when is a table a bed? Actually, what we understand as a table has in some way been societally constructed, that we understand certain things with 4 legs and a top as being a table. And there are lots of different things you can do with a table. You can eat off it, you can work at it, you can dance on it if you want to. But the context will be important. You might be able to dance on a table in a bar, you probably shouldn't do it at a family mealtime. So constructionists argue that the thing and the context matter. But this is slightly difficult for technology, I feel, and for tables, because there are limited things you can actually do with it. You cannot drive a table. You can't watch a film on a table. It constrains your behaviour in some way. And so this leads us to a middle point, which is an idea around affordances. So this is an idea that comes from the psychology of perception, and has also been used within design quite a lot. And there is a rock there is a good reason for this. So this is the example from psychology of perception. You see a rock. We can debate whether it's a rock or a stone or a pebble, but it's a rock. It has certain features. And you can do certain things with that rock. You can throw it at somebody's head. You can skip it across a lake. You could think it's a particularly pretty rock and take it home and give it as a gift to somebody, as lots of children like to do. But there are things you can't do with that rock. You can't make a phone call on it, for example. So the idea is that it is up to the user, the seer, to perceive what that object is. But that object also constrains what they can do. And this is the same for technology. You can build a feature into technology, and it will potentially constrain the users, but it will potentially afford them possibilities as well. And they will not always do what you expect with that feature. Take something like Twitter. Twitter was originally 140 characters. You had to be concise, right? And what did people do? They learned how to do threads of tweets. So nobody was ever concise. So Twitter extended it to 280 characters. And they allowed you to actually do threads. So what you see there is something is built into the technology which constrains users. But then they also find ways, A, around it, and B, to make use of it. And it's this idea of affordances which I think is particularly useful when looking at online communication. So, we have these theories, we have these ideas. How do we find out about them? Well, as psychologists, what we really like doing is experimenting on people. It's one of the things about being a psychologist. And so we like to put people into labs. This is not actually online communication research. This is our cyber psychology research lab at the University of Wolverhampton, where some of our staff and students are doing research during their lunch break on our games. It's a great resource. So what we do is we put people into labs, and we say, we want you to communicate with this stranger on WhatsApp for 20 minutes, get to know them. And at the end of that 20 minutes, we say to them, what did you think of that person? Did you like them? Did you not like them? What did you think of the interaction? And they'll kind of do these kind of questionnaires, and we'll come up with some idea about what it was about the technology that they liked. But there's an issue with that, because that's not really what happens in real life necessarily. We don't sit in a lab and do things under conditions for 20 minutes. We do things in situations where things matter. So for example, if you go on online dating and you're trying to get to know somebody, it actually matters what you say. If you do it in a lab, it really doesn't. And so this means that a lot of these studies lack what we call ecological validity. The idea that you can take something from a lab and apply it to things in the real world, that your findings will be applicable to the real world. So what's the solution to this? So one of them is, let's go and give people questionnaires. Let's ask them about their actual internet use. So this is actually a scale for measuring internet addiction. It's a scale where you have 5 options: strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. Now, this solves some of the problems of the fact that it's not ecologically valid, because you're actually asking people about their internet use. But there are problems. You only have a limited number of points on that scale. So let's take number 3. I would rather spend time online than do things around the house. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of vacuuming or washing up. I would always prefer to be online than doing those things. But I can't explain that if I say strongly agree. And also, the question's actually really badly worded because, what does it mean to do things around the house? So you have limited responses that you can give. And also, there is an aspect of, if any of you are reading this, you will be able to work out which answers you should give to make sure that you're not put down as being addicted to the internet, or that you are, depending on what you'd prefer. And so, depending on what you think is socially desirable, you're going to answer based on that. And this is known as social desirability bias. And so this is a problem in terms of questionnaires, and this may be something that's mentioned in the keynote tomorrow. So what else can we do? Well, we like to interview people and do focus groups. So we get people into a room, either just with a researcher or with a researcher and other people, and we ask them questions about their internet use. Tell me about the last time you used your phone. Tell me about, would you break up with somebody via Facebook or whatever. And we get them to talk to us. Now, this also still has problems. There's an issue around ecological validity again. We're taking people out from where they actually do things, putting them in a room and asking them questions. And then there's still an issue of social desirability bias. You're sitting in a room with other people being asked about what you use the internet for, and there's social desirability bias about what you're then going to say. So if all these things don't necessarily work, what do you do? Well, my argument is that you need to go out into the wild and see what people are doing using what we call naturally occurring data. So basically, any data that doesn't occur with the help of a researcher. So go out and see what people are actually doing on the internet. Now, some of you might be sitting here thinking, what, I've sat in 20 minutes of a talk for you to tell me that to understand how people behave online, we should go and look at what they do online. Cool, that's not a waste of my time at all. But believe it or not, if I went to a psychology conference and told them, what, we shouldn't do experiments, we shouldn't do interviews, we shouldn't do questionnaires, it would be horrendous. It would be shocking for psychologists to suggest that that's not what we should be doing. Now, there are movements to use data. It's what we call big data, so huge data sets, running statistical analyses. But I also think that we can get an awful lot from looking in detail at what happens online. And so what I'm going to show you is a few examples of really almost boring things, and show you how we can understand a lot about the technology and about the context just from looking at really basic things. So let's start with how people open a conversation. So this is some data from my PhD. I asked people to, in their own time, as they normally would, have chats with people on Facebook chat. This was before it was Facebook Messenger. It kind of changed to Facebook Messenger halfway through my PhD, which caused me quite a lot of angst. But this is Facebook chat. And they also, which I'll come back to in a bit, screen captured their data. So they recorded their screens as they were communicating. And so what we have here is the opening of a chat. So Katie says, "Fish ate my feet." And what you can see there is a really simple way of somebody dealing with the lack of paralinguistic cues. So the way that you can show this is something exciting. We then get a 160-second pause in brackets there. The pauses are in seconds for reasons which I'm not going to go into, just please go with me on it. And then Rob responds, "Did you like?" So, really mundane, boring opening, right? What's interesting? Well, first of all, what's interesting is what isn't there. Think about all the times in this conference that you've met up with somebody. You've probably started off with, "Hi, how are you? Great to see you." None of that. Straight into a topic initiation here. So we get no greetings. I've also seen, and I've done it myself, lots of people at conferences, "Hi, my name's Joe." We get none of that either. So there's no introductions, there's no greetings, there's none of what you would expect to be polite in a way. And what does that tell us? Well, first of all, it tells us something about the technology. You don't need to tell somebody who you are if your name is there. There's no point. It's a redundant thing. And you also don't need to necessarily do greetings. One of the reasons we do greetings when we see people is you're almost checking somebody's availability for a conversation. Certainly it happens to me a lot when I'm at work and I'll be walking along corridors and be like, "Oh, Joe, hi," and I'll be like, "I'm just going that way." And so you're checking, can somebody actually, have that conversation? But it doesn't matter online because the text stays there. Well, as soon as you come back to it, you can see that and you can continue the interaction. What does it tell us about the relationship? Well, first of all, the fact that Rob responds, "Did you like?" suggests, first of all, he's not offended by the fact there's no greetings. So potentially they're quite close. Secondly, Rob can tell, potentially from how she's written this, but also potentially from some previous knowledge, that the fact that fish ate her feet is not something that is to be concerning. He shouldn't call an ambulance at this point. It's something that she might enjoy. For those of you who don't know, this is a beauty therapy where you can have fish eat the dead skin off your feet. She did like it, weirdly. So, that's the opening of a very mundane conversation. Let's look at something slightly different. This is from Tinder. I'm happy for you guys as I'm talking to read this long opening, but basically it's a takeoff of the Liam Neeson speech from Taken. It's very clever. And what we can see here is, again, no introductions, no greetings, straight into what is basically a pickup line. Okay? And what do we see from the response? We see that this is okay. She doesn't say, "Oh, why haven't you said hi to me? Why haven't you, She's impressed. This has worked for him. This is actually from my student study last year on what does and doesn't work, and we decided that clearly Liam Neeson works for pickup lines. So these are really mundane things, and again, we can kind of see from the interaction that this works, and that the technology helps with that is there. You can actually see the gap between when they see them. That is there for her to come to whenever she logs back into Tinder. Now let's look at two more examples where the affordances are exactly the same, but the openings are so different. So we're going to go for Reddit. So this is the opening from /r/movies. It's a fairly mundane opening. What movies did you watch for the first time and immediately put into your top 3, 5, or 10? Now this links to the affordances of Reddit. When you look at Reddit, you're scrolling through, you want to see what is it that's interesting, what am I going to go and read, what do I want to look at? So that topic title, that opening, needs to give people enough information that they are likely to click on it, that they know what it's about and that they're going to click on it. You're trying to almost attract people to that conversation, which is quite different from what you need to do in a one-to-one instant messaging chat. And then we've got a little bit of detail and their answer, and then asking for other people's responses. Again, we've got no introductions or anything like that. That's not the expectation on that subreddit. Now let's look at another one. Hands up if you've come across /r/roastme. Okay, few of you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is a subreddit where people put pictures of themselves and ask people to insult them. I don't get it either, but it's apparently a thing. So this guy, it actually looks very different, this opening. I'm a diabetic straight male, never been kissed by a girl, and I went to college to become a teacher. Roast me. So this looks really different. We've actually got details. We've got an introduction. And this is nothing to do with the different affordances, although it still requires somebody wanting, you want somebody to click on it. But you need to give information about yourself so that the people responding have enough information to be able to insult you with. You also are required by the subreddit to include a photo of you saying roast me, because what they don't want is people randomly putting pictures of their friends up, being like, please insult my friend. So there's a requirement of it. So what we see is, despite the fact that they are exactly the same affordances, that the technology is exactly the same, the way in which people open those conversations are completely different. And this feeds into the more constructionist, contextual ideas rather than the cues filtered out ideas. Now, I'm just going to show you one more thing, because one of the things that people in psychology are very worried about, and people like Turkle are worried about, is that you can spend a lot of time online changing what you're going to say so that the best you is put out there. You can spend hours rewriting posts, but we don't really know what people do online when they're actually changing those posts. Except if you'll remember, I screen captured my participants' Facebook chats, so I do know. And what I'm going to show you is an example. So, these are two of my participants. Well, Isla is my participant. She has been out on a Friday night with Joe, who is a friend of hers. Joe has said he does not remember anything from that Friday night. He was too drunk. Isla does remember, and Isla is about to tell him. So I'm going to play you this, and what you'll see is writing appear here. We're going to sit in silence for like 40 seconds, which is always slightly awkward whenever I play this, so please just, go with it. What I want you to see is what she writes and what she then deletes. If you can't see it, I will put a transcript up on the next page. Okay, so what we had there was Isla saying, okay, you might not want to hear this, but despite the fact that I don't remember everything, I do seem to remember kissing you at one point, then running away, haha. There is then a 38-second pause, which I removed from the video because we'd have just sat there for 38 seconds staring at a blank screen. And then she deletes, then running away, haha, and then there's another 24-second pause before she actually hits enter and sends the message. Now, one of the great things about this is when you actually look at people who are producing difficult turns or difficult bits of conversation in spoken interaction, what you see is a lot of this pausing and changing things. So you can actually, a lot of the work that I've done around this shows that we're very concerned with very similar things online than offline. But the interesting thing is to explore, well, why does this get deleted? Is this just about Isla wanting to look as good as possible for Joe? And I would argue that this actually has an awful lot more to do with the way in which Joe might potentially read this message. Because by including the ha-ha, which again is a great way of dealing with the fact that you don't have paralinguistic cues, you can't show laughter, that suggests it's a joke, that this is funny, that they kissed and it's amusing. And so by deleting it, it suggests that Joe won't read it as funny, that the response won't be something, oh, well, that's hilarious. And then by deleting then running away suggests that this might have been quite a fleeting kiss. We kissed, I ran away. Or, as one of my students pointed out, maybe it suggests that the kiss was so bad that she ran away immediately afterwards. So by deleting it, it impacts upon the potential responses. And this is what we're concerned about in spoken interaction as well. How are people going to respond to what we say? And one of the things I would argue about anything when it comes to online communication, when you look at what really happens, whether it's to do with Brexit or whether it's just a mundane thing, it's about the actual or potential responses you might get. Who's reading it and how are they going to read it and how are they going to respond to it? For what it's worth, Isla's deletion didn't work brilliantly in that Joe simply told her it was all just a dream she had and it didn't really happen. Poor Isla. So, just to draw this to a conclusion, what do I think are the benefits of looking at online data in this way. And what do I think that it can do for psychology? Well, firstly, for psychology, I think it can really help us with understanding what's actually going on online. How people are really behaving online and what really happens, rather than just coming up with theories or asking people or putting them in a lab. We can actually understand what's happening online. The other thing we can do is, once we understand what's happening online, we can start to think about training people. So this is one of the things that we're looking at with Staffordshire Police. Their call handlers are trained to take telephone calls. They're not trained to answer Facebook and Twitter messages. So we're going to look at how they actually respond to them and then try and develop training programs to improve things. So there's a really simple thing we've noticed. With telephone calls, when they get those type of phone calls into the police, you need to answer them as quickly as possible. And so they're still trying to do that online. But actually, online you don't need to respond within 30 seconds. It's okay to respond to a Twitter message 10 minutes after it was sent. So this is the type of thing that we're going to work towards training. And we can also start to think about advising people. So for people who use things like instant messaging in the workplace, how can we help with advising them how to use it in a more efficient and effective way? Or, on a more serious note, what about when there's abusive or hate crime happening online? Can we start to look at how that happens, when it happens, whether anything actually works out there in the real world to mitigate that? And so this comes to my final point, which is, why am I here at a software development conference? And my point is, for psychologists, what we really need is data. We need real-life data. And we are really bad, and it is a thing within academia in general, but we are really bad at going and speaking to people who might be able to help us in other settings. We very much like to stay in our lane. We are not good at crossing over the road and going and speaking to the computer scientists and saying, hey guys, we need some help with getting data. So I think we can do this better. And I think software developers can help us. We're coming up with ways of getting access to this type of data that doesn't just involve, copying and pasting millions of comments. And they can help us with the technology. So one of the things I've been struggling with is working out how to do screen capture on mobile phones, because nobody uses desktops anymore as they did when I did my PhD. So I'd leave you with this. If you have data and you think, hey, you know what? It'd be really good to get somebody to look at that. Come and talk to me. If at a later point you think, hey, I've got this idea, we've got this thing, we could do with some research, think about contacting a cyber psychologist. If you have ideas for technology that might help with this type of research, come and talk to me. So I'm going to be around after this. I'll be around this evening. These are my details. You can contact me at my email address, or you can, I'm always on Twitter because it's kind of literally my job. Thank you very much.